I'd hate to see Walter's long introduction. So this is great. Thank you for coming on this cold, rainy day to talk about old age, which, you know, is not a popular subject, but we like it. We're gerontologists, and we're here to make it interesting from a local Detroit perspective. There we go. All right, there are 4 of us here today, but we're members of the Hannon Archival Research Group, which includes 12 faculty and graduate students from Wayne State University and 2 members, a faculty member and a graduate student from Virginia Tech. The 3 members here today, besides myself, are Tom Jankowski, who's Associate Director of Research at the Institute of Gerontology, Faith Pratt-Hopp, who's Assistant Professor in the School of Social Work, and Heather Dillaway, who's Associate Professor in the Department of Sociology, and her Graduate Assistant, Chastity Bailey-Facuri. Also here is Tim Wintermute, who's now the Executive Director of the Hannon Foundation in 2010. The data we draw on is from the Hannon Foundation in the 1930s. So all 4 of us are going to talk for 10 minutes. We promise to leave 10 minutes at the end for questions. So we're going to breeze through our slides. Please hold your questions and comments until the end. I'm going to give you a little background about who we are and what we do. Tom is going to talk about Detroit during the Great Depression, particularly its public assistance program. Faith is going to talk about the historical data that we're drawing on and why that's particularly significant for the history of social work, geriatric social work. And Heather is going to talk about one specific case from the archives and why a case analysis is interesting and important. And I'm going to tell you what it all means, why you should care. So we represent 7 different disciplines. We do what I like to call the interdisciplinary humanities, by which I mean humanists and social scientists working collaboratively to address social issues using humanistic methods. Our methods are archival research, historical study, case analysis, and narrative analysis. Our data collection is an archive of social work files kept during the Great Depression by some of America's first geriatric social workers who were in the city of Detroit. We are covering the period only between 1927 and 1934, which is when the bulk of the cases were acquired from this foundation. This foundation still exists, and it's about 3 blocks away on Woodward Avenue. So we're looking at the detailed case logs of the visitors taken during this time of the cases that were funded as well as those that were not funded. These are old people, over 60 if you're a woman, over 65 if you were a man, who applied for assistance from this organization. The Hannon Foundation was based on a trust established by Luella Hannon in 1925. Her original intent was to build an old age home in the city of Detroit for a certain class of people. She was not able to build that home during that time, and so the Board of Trustees began to provide so-called outdoor relief in the form of pensions to people living in the community. In addition to the Hannon Trust, the Luella Hannon Memorial Home, as it was called at the time, even though it wasn't a home, it was still called the Luella Hannon Memorial Home, also administered a trust established by John Scudder in 1925 to aid a broader category of people, and we're very grateful to have both the Hannon Trust clients and the Scudder clients in this database because it gives us a diverse clientele to look at. Why were these foundations established in 1925? The reasons were not entirely altruistic. In 1917, Congress passed a law that made charitable contributions tax deductible. In the 1920s, people were very prosperous. Wealthy people were very prosperous. So John Scudder and Luella Hannon developed their trust in 1925 at the same time when the Breger Fund was developed, 1925. Presby Foundation was established, the Mott Foundation was established, all between 1924 and 1926. There was great need for private charities because there were no social assistance programs. There was no Social Security, there was no unemployment insurance in 1930. There were very few old age pensions, private pensions. So what did you do when you got old? You either lived with the support of your family, your children, or you applied for assistance, charitable assistance from private charities or public assistance from the Department of Public Welfare. Tom's going to talk about the Department of Public Welfare, which was one of the most progressive of its time. But the charity network was pretty extensive in Detroit as well. It was nationally extensive, and in Detroit it was especially important because Detroit was hit very hard by the Depression. Homelessness rose to great levels in the city. And you might not know this, in 1932, which was the height of the Depression was from 1929 to 1941. You don't remember that period. In 1932, Detroit was beginning to really feel beleaguered by the Depression. The charities had pretty much exhausted all of their resources, as had the Department of Public Welfare. At that time, the city of Detroit had been promising landlords that it would pay back rent of its tenants, but then it didn't have the money to do that, and so hundreds of families were evicted from their homes and apartments. Clark Park set up a tent city for families without homes. People over 60 especially were hard hit because they faced ageism, rampant ageism in the job market. Anybody over 45 was kind of suspect in terms of getting a job, and in the auto companies as well. So we know from the case files that people cobbled together assistance from many different sources, family, friends, neighbors, and local charities, and we know about all of these local charities from the case files. And the Hannon Foundation social workers, called visitors, interacted with these charity workers from other organizations, and so we have their notes and their correspondence. And people relied very heavily on their family. Sometimes a local grocer would give you credit for groceries for a period of time. And they also rented out their rooms and apartments. It was not unusual for a person. The first client, for example, funded in February 1929, was 64. She had a 7-room apartment, and she rented out 3 rooms and had someone sleeping on a cot in her dining room just to make ends meet. The Detroit Associated Charities were located at 51 West Warren. You might recognize that building, which is still there but not for long. It might actually be gone this afternoon.
Oh, no.
The Llewellyn Hannon Memorial Home offices were located there, along with the Visiting Nurses Association, Legal Aid, other charitable organizations. That used to say there in the arch of the front door, the Detroit Community Fund building. There were 9 private institutions, old age homes in Detroit during this time. They were mostly religiously affiliated. 1 accepted black clients. The admission for room and board was $35 to $40, which was, a pretty hefty fee at the time for most older adults. They did not take couples, so you had to go into a different home if you were married. The alternative in terms of indoor relief to an old age home, if your family couldn't support you, was the county poorhouse, known as Eloise, and Tom will talk about the county poorhouse. So hence the need for the Llewellyn Hannon Memorial Home, which was inundated with applications during its first 2 years. It funded 50% of those who applied, and during this period that we're looking at, 506 people applied. Most of the people funded were females, because then, as now, the likelihood of being poor in old age is higher if you're a woman or an ethnic or racial minority.